Trump said after high-level talks with Xi Jinping that both leaders agreed the Strait of Hormuz must remain open as tensions surrounding the Iran war continue to shake global markets and increase fears of a wider international conflict while energy prices continue rising and world leaders push for diplomacy before the crisis spirals further out of control. Trump claimed that Xi told him China would not provide military equipment to Iran and would instead support efforts aimed at stabilizing the region because China relies heavily on oil shipments passing through the narrow strategic waterway which carries a major share of the world's energy supplies every day. According to Trump, the Chinese leader also expressed willingness to help reopen the strait and reduce the risk of further disruption after weeks of military escalation involving the United States, Israel, and Iran triggered one of the worst global oil crises in recent years as commercial shipping traffic slowed dramatically and several cargo vessels faced attacks, seizures, and security threats near Gulf waters. Trump described the discussions as productive and said both Washington and Beijing share concerns about Iran potentially developing nuclear weapons while also wanting to prevent a total economic collapse caused by blocked shipping routes and soaring fuel prices. Although Chinese officials later avoided confirming several details of Trump's statements and instead emphasized that the conflict should never have started in the first place while calling for peace negotiations and regional stability, the situation remains highly tense because Iran has insisted it will not fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz unless American restrictions and military pressure are eased. Meanwhile, the United States continues enforcing naval operations around the Gulf and warning Tehran against any attempt to threaten international shipping routes. Analysts say China holds enormous influence because it remains one of the biggest buyers of Iranian oil and any pressure from Beijing could affect Tehran's decisions during negotiations. However, experts also note that China traditionally avoids direct military involvement and prefers diplomatic solutions that protect its trade and energy interests. Trump said she clearly understands the economic damage caused by the crisis because China depends heavily on Middle Eastern oil imports and any prolonged closure of the strait could hurt global manufacturing supply chains, inflation levels, and international financial markets across Asia, Europe, and North America. Financial markets reacted nervously after the summit because investors were hoping for an immediate breakthrough that would reopen shipping lanes and lower oil prices, but no final agreement emerged and uncertainty continued spreading across energy markets with oil prices remaining above $100 per barrel while shipping insurance costs also surged due to fears of missile attacks, drone strikes, and naval confrontations in the Gulf region. Reports indicated that some Chinese vessels were still allowed limited passage through the waterway under special arrangements with Iranian authorities while many international ships continued facing delays or diversions. The White House said both leaders agreed the strait should stay open for the free flow of global energy and emphasized that economic stability depends on uninterrupted maritime trade routes. Trump also suggested that sanctions on some Chinese companies buying Iranian oil could eventually be reconsidered if Beijing helps achieve progress toward peace and secure navigation routes, although he insisted he was not asking China for favors because such requests usually require concessions in return. Diplomatic observers described the summit as one of the most important meetings between the United States and China in recent years because the Iran conflict has become deeply connected to wider geopolitical tensions involving trade, military power, and global influence. While Washington seeks stronger international pressure on Tehran, Beijing continues balancing its partnership with Iran against its economic interests and relations with Western countries. During interviews following the talks, Trump repeatedly praised his relationship with Xi and said the Chinese president wants the conflict resolved peacefully while also preventing further economic instability. He added that Xi strongly opposed the militarization of the Strait of Hormuz and any attempt to impose tolls or restrictions on commercial vessels crossing the route. Chinese state media, however, focused more on calls for peace and dialogue instead of discussing Trump's claims about military support and oil negotiations, which created speculation among analysts about differences between the two governments' public messaging. Despite the uncertainty, the meeting signaled that both global powers recognize the enormous risks posed by continued fighting in the Middle East because even a temporary closure of the Strait of Hormuz can disrupt world trade, raise inflation, increase fuel prices, and damage economic recovery efforts across multiple countries. Security experts warned that the danger of accidental escalation remains extremely high as warships, drones, missiles, and armed patrols continue operating near crowded shipping lanes where even a small incident could trigger a larger confrontation involving regional and international powers. Meanwhile, diplomatic talks between Iran and the United States remain fragile, with disagreements continuing over sanctions sanctions uranium enrichment and control of maritime security operations, while European governments, Gulf states and Asian economies closely monitor developments, hoping the crisis can be contained before it causes a deeper global recession. Trump insisted that the United States remains prepared to respond militarily if necessary, but also stressed that diplomacy remains the preferred option because another major conflict in the Middle East would carry severe consequences for international stability. Xi meanwhile reportedly encouraged negotiations and economic cooperation while signaling that China wants uninterrupted energy supplies and peaceful trade routes rather than prolonged warfare. As both leaders attempt to present themselves as defenders of global stability, the world now watches whether their discussions can actually reduce tensions or whether the conflict surrounding Iran and the Strait of Hormuz will continue threatening energy markets, international shipping and geopolitical relations for months ahead as uncertainty spreads across financial markets, governments and military alliances around the world. Reuters +3